When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. And so I am up, ever vigilant. I think I had a quick nap, but I came back after that nap. I couldn't necessarily get to bed, so I figured let's get some work done. But there's been a proliferation of photos that I've been bugged by, been somewhat plagued by, because I think they're somewhat ill-timed, and I consider them propaganda pieces. It's kind of like ISIS, when these guys are out there chopping off heads, but then they'll cuddle with a puppy, and then the propaganda networks will put that up, and they would say, hey, see, yes, they're brutal towards, those infidels. However, they love kittens, and they love puppies. And so they're not that really rough. There's a soft, cuddly side inside of this thick neck, long beard terrorists. Well, something like that is taking place here in the United States. And I'm not saying cops are terrorists. I'm not going there. I'm just making the very basic point that in the same way that a violent group of human beings that are oppressing and beating other human beings and basically flagrantly ignoring human rights, even from the standpoint of engaging or realizing that that other person is even a human being that they're engaging with, well, you have something similar. And instead of dealing with the real material issues associated with that, you instead take propaganda photos and then put them in the newspapers to make it look like, hey, they're not all that bad. Look at that good guy. See, some of them are good apples. I would imagine some are good, but I think the main problem here is that there's so many that are bad. I would say the preponderance or the preponderance of the evidence, to me anyway, shows that the bulk of them are bad. And the one or two good apples that you may have in that mix basically get drowned out. And beyond the point of getting drowned out, what does it mean when you have a bunch of officers that see somebody do something that's utterly horrendous and don't say anything and covers for that person? Is that person a good person if they do that? I hope you understand what I'm getting at here. Just because right now, these protests were sparked off by police violence. Every year, police kill over 1,000 people. Last year, I think they killed 1,050, 1,080, something to that effect. Between 2013 and 2019, 99% of the police officers that were involved in killings got off, no charges. So you have violence coupled with no accountability at all. Basically, they can dispense the maximum amount of force for the smallest of incidents, and ultimately they could be assured, more or less, that they'll get off. The George Floyd case has basically set this very specific issue on fire and turned this into somewhat of a national conversation with people being outraged at a cop casually kneeling on a man's throat for 9 minutes. Well, right now, as these protests take all over, the United States, we're seeing images like this. Cops absolutely 1,000% unhinged, where they're using batons, mace, tear gas, and everything else they can get their hands on to beat and injure basically peaceful protesters. The violence that is being perpetrated at these protests and at these rallies are coming from the cops. All these rallies, for the most part, have been peaceful. And then what would end up happening is the cops would basically descend on the protesters, beating and hitting and kicking and everything else, turning this into this kind of chaotic situation, especially when they're releasing tear gas or when they're letting off flashbang grenades. The other scene to this is less chaotic, but I would make the case just as bad. Take a look at this. Solidarity. Cop solidarity. Yes, we're cops. And yes, we'll beat that ass. However, in this very specific moment, we want you to see that we are in solidarity with you black folks. Solidarity, brothers. Solidarity. What's interesting to note is that 45 minutes later, these cops that are showing solidarity maced the people who they were showing solidarity with. 45 minutes. Didn't take long at all. You think that's a once-off? Nope, that's not a once-off at all. Same here in Kansas City. Solidarity! Solidarity! Here's another one. Right here. New York Police Department have taken a knee in solidarity with the protesters. Look at them. They're taking the knee right here. Right here. That picture's hard to see, but let's see if I can blow it up. Solidarity, bitches. Right here. Solidarity. They beat the living shit out of us an hour after this. They beat the living shit out of one of us an hour. Oh, I'm sorry. They beat the living shit out of us 1 hour after this. Solidarity. They beat the shit out of us. Solidarity. They beat the living shit out of us. Yes, this is a trend. This is a situation where cops are basically taking propaganda photos and then turning around and abusing and bashing the protesters. Another situation that they are mentioning. So this gentleman, the name is another Twitter user in Detroit, basically said the head of DPD knelt down with us. I'll show you what I'm looking at. The head of DPD knelt down with us, then 10 minutes later authorized tear gas. Fuck their performances. Fuck their performances. That's what they are. Theatrics. Performative trash. Taking the knee and then turning around and abusing the protesters after taking the knee. This other person said they saw the cops put their helmet on, the tear gas on. Starry Danny described a similar about face when the Portland Police Department, let's close this down. When the Portland Police Department, after some of their officers used to take a knee as a photo opportunity, immediately gas masks were put on and gassed the entire park. Let me repeat that. The officers took a knee, and after taking the knee, solidarity with the people who were there, fuck those cops who killed George Floyd, and we need to be better as policemen. They got up, shook hands or whatever, put their gas mask on, and gassed the entire park. There's a pattern here. Theatrical photo, solidarity, applaud, they're not all bad apples, gassing, beating, Mace, tear gas. These are propaganda pictures. The reality of it is the cops have been utterly and entirely unhinged. I can show you 1,000 videos of cops behaving poorly, and in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, getting away with it without consequence. Donald Trump has declared war on the American public. And in honest reality, where he's talking about using the military and whatnot, invading our soil, in Washington, D.C., where we are, he's already done that. We already have military here. We have cops here who are hiding their badges. We have people here who are functioning as some kind of security operation, but don't have to tell you who they are or where they're from, because technically they're not cops. Like, this is what's taking place in D.C. Donald Trump wants to visit us across the entirety of the United States. So yes, when I make the point that says he's declared war on the United States, even the language of using terrorists. Terrorists, what's a terrorist? A terrorist is always a relative term. Some people terrorists are other people's freedom fighters. If the cops are dragging people in, what do they call them? Rioters. They could just be out there protesting. Oh hell, they might have just annoyed the cop. It might be 2 minutes beyond curfew, and they're going to say rioters. Understand, the entire point of curfew is basically criminalize anybody who's on the street. That is literally the point of it. And so if they make a curfew at 7 o'clock, criminalize. 5 o'clock, criminalize. And the only recourse for the protesters is to violate that curfew. Otherwise, you're not protesting. You're doing something else. This is the way they criminalize it. This is the way they're allowed to bash and batter and beat and use some level of justification for it, because many people, especially people who don't necessarily agree with the protests, the majority of the public does agree with it. But the people who don't may say, well, hey, those people shouldn't have been out past curfew. Again, the entire point of the curfew is to give legitimacy to the beating and the attacking and the tear gas and to justify those grotesque actions towards people who are peacefully assembling and utilizing their First Amendment rights. Like, share,